The entire agri-food sector bears the brunt of the climate crisis.
Pour parler d'agriculture et d'Europe à la jeunesse.
Proteste der Landwirte zeigen, wie wichtig der stratégische Dialog ist.
La PAC, c'est plus du tiers du budget total de l'Union européenne.
We have to find a new consensus on the future of agriculture.
57 is the average age of a European farmer. This figure is all the more alarming, according to specialists in the sector, as it continues to rise. If nothing changes, it means that in 10 years, more than half of farmers in the EU will have retired. So what does the future hold for European agriculture? How can we ensure the mantle is passed on, and with it, our food security? I went to meet some young people who decided to take up the challenge. Welcome to this 55th edition of Food for Europe.
Welcome to my farm. We are just done with milking. So we are in Flanders, not so far from the Dutch border. If you compare Flanders with the rest of Europe, they always say that Flanders has the best climate, the best soils to farm. So it's actually the best place to farm, and we have a lot of water availability here.
The low-lying fields that surround us are warmed by a generous spring sun. It's Saturday, a day like any other for 24-year-old Justine Poppe. Born into a family of dairy farmers, she helps her parents on a daily basis on their 100-hectare farm. She warmly welcomes me in her work clothes, a khaki rubber jumpsuit and boots.
So, this is my wheelbarrow, and I have to get first some cookies out of the storage over there. Be careful, because there will be a lot of dust when you open it. So I have a typical mixed Flemish farm with pigs. We have around 180 dairy cows, and then we have a little bit of crops like 20 hectares of potatoes. But the rest of our land we use for the feed for our cows, like maize and grass.
Justine also works part-time as a journalist for an agricultural journal. When I ask her how she defines herself professionally, she doesn't hesitate for a second.
I feel really like a farmer, and I first said, well, I want to go to work, because if you take over the farm, then it's for the rest of your life. It's a big amount of money. You will do a repayment for life. So before I take that huge decision, I first want to spread my wings a bit and see a bit more of the world, see a bit more how farmers do it in other countries, and connect with people. What the future brings is not very clear yet.
But one thing is certain, the future of this family farm is ensured, since her brother is also destined for an agricultural career. This is far from being the case on other farms in the region.
In the past, when my grandfather was here, were like 15 farmers or something like that.
But now, we are only 2 farmers left. And that's mostly because of farmers get older and get on pension, and they don't have young people who want to take over the farm. I also have friends who are advisors in the sector. I have to visit, I think, like 3 farms a day to advise the people. They say 2/3 of the farms have no successor.
And when I talk about neo-rurals as a potential solution to this generational renewal crisis, Justine is not convinced.
I think it's a way of life, and sometimes Europe thinks they will make farmers buy more subsidies or by school, but that's totally wrong. You have to make farmers when they are kids. The only way you can make new farmers is generational renewal from the father who stops, and then the kids comes into the farm, because I think citizens who are starting to farm have more short-term view.
As a member of CEJA, the European Council of Young Farmers, Justine has been invited by the European Commission to participate in the Youth Policy Dialogue. That is, a series of meetings between young Europeans from the agricultural and rural world and Christophe Hansen, the European Commissioner for Agriculture and Food. the objective helping young farmers get established. It is therefore in central Brussels that I meet Justine on the 7th of May after a day full of discussions. Her first impression is positive, perhaps because Christophe Hansen, like her, has his roots in the farmyard.
Well, youth dialogue is a good step forward, but I'm also very happy that Hansen has a really other way of working. So he visits all countries in Europe, and there was one farmer who said, okay, maybe you have to come to Spain to see that we are working with very old materials from my grandfather. And Hansen said, okay, yes, that would be nice to go to Spain, because then he really get in touch with the problems, bring more the practical stuff into the EU, because legislation is made in the city, but they are really not aware what is happening outside those cities. So that's important.
Justine had the opportunity to explain the difficulties she faces as a Flemish farmer.
So in Flanders, we are a very fragmented area with a lot of nature areas, a lot of cities. If I want to take over the farm, I really have a problem because our land is so fragmented. So my input in this discussion or youth dialogue was really that farmland has to be protected. Another thing that I really find important is that, you know, if I farm next to a nature area, especially a Natura 2000 area, that is actually an area that is protected from the European Union. If I farm next to that, then there's very severe legislation. A lot of farmers in Flanders have to invest in really expensive techniques that is not so profitable for our farm. And an example of that is an ammonia scrubber. Then I really want to have a really flexible investment aid from the CAP that make that I can adapt to European sustainable rules or nature rules. That was my input.
An opportunity for Justine to better understand how competences are split between national and European institutions.
So I mentioned it, but then the Commissioner really pointed that it's a national legislation. The member states have to do that. So he really told the farmers that, okay, this works not. And that was very clear. And that's actually an answer to all my questions I have.
The subject of the dialogue was access to land and to finance, two major obstacles for young farmers who are establishing themselves.
Yeah, in Flanders, the land prices have an average of 80,000 euros. So that is the most threatening thing for me. You know, when land prices are so high, then they see land more as a holding than an investment. I think that you only can have land if you have a father or a mother who already had a career and some land, because the land price is rising every year. And in the time of my mother and father, it was affordable.
For Justine, the issue of financing in agriculture is truly problematic and a source of uncertainty.
Someone who goes to work 9 to 5 has a certain income, but as a farmer, you don't. Especially as a young farmer, you are a very high risk profile for the bank. So one thing that we said is that banks maybe have to give us flexible credits, because especially with climate change, we have some bad years and then you don't have good harvest and you don't have a good income. And the bank is scared to give us a credit because the legislation is changing almost every 10 years. And a repayment of a credit is longer than a political legislation. So that is very difficult for us. We don't know in 10 years what is it going to be.
From this exchange with Justine, one thing struck me: her belief that farming is now inaccessible to young people not from an agricultural background. However, other testimonials tell a different story. To hear them, I headed to a conference where the European Commission was outlining its vision for agriculture and food in the heart of Brussels.
L'entrée principale, c'est là, pour le congrès hier.
Faut monter l'escalator, hein?
You take a seat and let's get started.
The testimony of Anne Van Leeuwen in particular, a 36-year-old Dutch woman specializing in regenerative agriculture, catches my attention, and the audience's too.
Then if my child is 5 years old, farming is something to aspire to here.
I met up with Anne during the lunch break.
When I was around 5 years old, I wanted to be a farmer because that seemed to me the most beautiful job in the world. And I got a lot of negative feedback on that. And that was the first time that I also realized apparently people don't see farming as a beautiful thing. It was even used as a swearing word. So it was just used to belittle me, actually.
Seeing how her childhood ambition was looked down upon by those around her led Anne to carry out a long philosophical and sociological reflection on how we conceive of agriculture.
I ended up studying art history, and then I wanted to take on biology courses because for me that seemed like an ideal, intuitive combination. And then the exam committee didn't think that was a great idea at all. And that was for the first time that I realized that this sort of split is not only between nature and agriculture, but it's actually between nature and culture in our whole society. So I took 9 years studying this nature-culture divide, trying to find a way to combine it anyway. And also I started to see that a lot of the things that we experience now as huge problems, the climate crisis, the loss of life on this planet, and social inequality, that are actually interrelated, are coming from that disconnect. Not only in our heads, in our worldview, but we also institutionalized this deep split. I think the result is that because we have this culture, we're constantly trying to fix symptoms, but we're not addressing the root cause of the problem. And I started to see how deep that root cause actually runs.
It was then that Anne discovered regenerative agriculture, which would bring her back to her childhood dream.
It's a totally different thinking. It's not an either-or. It's not nature or agriculture or biodiversity or productivity. No, it's and that could also feed us all. I was also still stuck in this academic mindset in which somehow you are told if you have the knowledge, you have the right to tell other people what they have to do on the ground. But that's also a disconnect. And it was only when we started traveling to farms and speaking with amazing pioneering farmers and that we realized, no, the way for us to go is to be farmers ourselves, to take that responsibility, but also to get back in touch, not only with food and with landscape, but also with ourselves.
Neither Anne, by this point an art historian, nor her companion, a biologist specializing in amphibians, had land at their disposal. Finding funding was therefore vital, but turned out to be quite the ordeal.
It is super difficult. So that's also something we found out because we were not only new to farming, but also new to entrepreneurship. We immediately figured out that it was a bit like a chicken or egg thing. First, we put a lot of effort in writing a business plan. It was still not a business plan that was landed because we didn't have access to land yet. And soon we realized that all the financiers were saying, we're not going to finance you without land. And all the landowners were saying, we're not going to start this endeavor with you without finance. I think for a lot of new entry farmers, it's really difficult to find ways to make it happen. In the end, we had to win an international prize with our business plan to get a loan with 7% interest, which is crazy if you think about it now. But it was for us the only way to get started. We started farming 6 years ago, mostly leasing the land so we can keep our loan very small. It took a lot from us, all our savings, all our time, all our energy to get it off the ground because there's no simple entrance.
Like Justine, Anne insists on the need for financing solutions that are commensurate with the challenges which young farmers face upon entering the profession.
I really think we need a different financing structure for the startup businesses and for the transition businesses. Nobody wanted to take the risk. It's simply not fair to put all the risk on the starting farmers and to ask for the transition. But that's what's happening now. So what we really need is a financing structure for these starting farmers. And that financing structure needs to be long-term and patient. We need to get rid of the insecurity. That is the most important thing. Of course, you can still be critical on the business side of things. But if you see now the soaring land prices in the Netherlands, it's crazy. It's 100,000 euros per hectare. It's just an insane amount of money. You can farm for 500 years, to repay that. So we need also to think about what do we do with the speculative market prices? How can we provide access to ground and to building so farmers can actually start? What I see now in the Netherlands is that there are citizen initiatives that make this possible because the government is not there. So I'm now farming at a farm that is pre-financed by a foundation. They start up a local corporation that owns the grounds and the buildings. The local corporation gets a loan with a tiny interest that needs to be repaid to the foundation, and that money that flows back is used to pre-finance another farm. That's why I can have access now to the farm that I'm currently farming at, which is a 45-hectare farm.
Today, the farm brings together 4 agricultural entrepreneurs. By 2030, their number could reach 16. They base their resilience, both economic and organic, on a diversified output: vegetables, herbs, and fruits, as well as a plant nursery and livestock.
It runs on diversity because we don't use any pesticides and we don't use any artificial fertilizer. So instead of thinking, hey, we have a so-called pest and we need to eradicate the pest, we are asking ourselves, hey, who can we invite to eat our pest?
It's a way of farming which speaks to young people in particular.
But we get a lot of interest. The problem is that a lot of people cannot find ways to access the knowledge that we have. That's why we also invest a lot in, communicating about what we're doing, but also giving courses to help other farmers, or sometimes we support them personally in their journeys. And that's also the reason why we're part of EARA, which is the European Alliance of Regenerative Agriculture, to speed up the learning curve and the exchange of knowledge. Because as a farmer, you have only once a year chance to learn something. You have to wait another year to try it again differently.
But this personal investment does not provide a fair return. On Anne's farm, a solution is being assessed.
I want to earn an honest income as a farmer. I need to raise my prices to make it possible for me to have at least the minimum wage. Proper, nutritious, poison-free food, it should never be an elite product. Never. So what we're doing now, for example, if we sell our vegetables to our local community, we ask people, we tell people, this is the reasonable price. If everybody chooses, this reasonable price, our income will be minimum wage. Then we have another option, which is a good price. We say, if you can afford it, please choose the good price, because by choosing the good price, you will enable that somebody can choose the minimum. We call it solidarity payment system, but actually this should be done, of course, on a bigger economic level, because somehow in the Netherlands, it's crazy. We are a very rich European country, but we spend very little of our income. I think it's only 11 or 12% on food. And I have had people at the farm, driving an Audi with kids in the background with iPads that told me my vegetables were too expensive. It's not only about the price, it's also about the culture. And in the Netherlands, we have this crazy culture that we cut on food. And I think that's a very detrimental way of not only dealing with food, but also with your own health. Because proper food is like preventive medicine.
Café, madame?
One thing is clear: farming is a labour of love. But the fear of being isolated in rural backwaters can be a drawback for young people attracted to the sector. Martin Siemen, 30, is no farmer, rather a shipbuilding engineer in Lower Saxony, northwest Germany. As Vice President of Rural Youth Europe, an NGO which aims to improve quality of life in the countryside, he participated the day before in the dialogue on young people in the agricultural sector and spoke at the conference in a debate on generational renewal.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome back.
I met him after his contribution.
The rural exodus of young people is still a reality because the issues we talked about 20 years ago are still there. There is a lack of infrastructure, there is a lack of opportunities, there is a lack of a sense of belonging for many young people. And when they look for a different job, they need to move to another city and they can't stick to that rural community.
Martin is well aware that it's not possible to have a train station, a school, a hospital, and all the services of a big city in every small village. He calls for creativity from policymakers and suggests some innovative solutions.
For public transport, we're discussing a lot on microbuses. We're hoping for solutions involving also new technology, like self-driving solutions. Some smaller places around my home have introduced that already. You can call a bus at night to come to the place, so they don't need to run regularly, but They just go when they are needed.
For Martin, ensuring generational renewal in agriculture also means taking into account the daily reality of young farmers, especially when they hope to start a family.
A family takes time, and every person who has a different job than in farming can have time off from work. That's not possible on a farm, and therefore solutions are needed. What we saw in France, for example, they have a replacement scheme when farmers get sick, and this could be enlarged when farmers have kids. There are farm helpers maybe that help on the farms for several months.
Finally, I asked Martin what he expected from the European Commission today.
We would like to have the rural development more in focus because it's the basis of the whole rural community and in the end then also the basis of farming. Another thing that was also discussed in the youth policy dialogue is that we're missing often these very specific solutions. It's always big words and visions, but where are the actions? Where do we see European agriculture in rural areas in 5 years?
Hoping to get some clarity, I'm joined by the European Commissioner for Agriculture and Food, Christophe Hansen. Hello, Commissioner Hansen, and welcome to Food for Europe.
Bonjour et merci pour l'invitation.
As we heard in the testimonies from Justine and Anne, access to finance and access to land are two major obstacles to young farmers who are just starting out. What are the levers at the European Commission's disposal to break down these barriers?
First, there are not only obstacles that can be solved at the European level, it is also the national and local levels which must contribute. We had, for example, a testimony from the Austrian minister today who actually also explained to us why in Austria they do much better than in the rest of the European Union. And this is due in particular to very advanced education coupled with research. The second point, of course, is also social security, which is a national competence, where the member states must contribute with programs to make it easier for the older generation to retire as well. At European level, of course, what we are going to do is give a little more to those who need it most. And for me, of course, that means young farmers and beginners are one of those priorities where we need to direct more help, and also women farmers, because they have even more problems with financing. So there is obviously the financial aspect, but also, as you said, the question of access to land. With the European Investment Bank, we have also already developed a specific credit program for young people to speed this up. But I also think we have to do a very serious job with our banks and also see what we can do on that side. On the other hand, it's obviously also the agricultural policy itself that contributes to the difficulties because the subsidy payments are per hectare. Often, it is a landowner who continues to receive the help, while it is a young person who is actually working the land. These are things that don't work properly, and you have to work on improving them. So here too, we are developing an observatory of agricultural land to precisely know who is investing in agricultural land. It will be very important to have this information if we are to find solutions to the problem.
When can we expect these reforms to take place?
There is limited room for maneuver in the current agricultural policy, but as you know, we're going to start a new cycle based on the new multi-annual financial framework, which we are going to start talking about just before the summer.
Anne Van Leeuwen explained to us how society's lack of respect for farmers initially led her to abandon her vocation. Do you have any ideas for improving the status of the profession?
I think we need to put the farmer back at the centre of the discussion. Farmers have often been stigmatised for causing environmental degradation. I think farmers are actually the first victims of climate change, but they are also our best line of defence against climate change and the loss of biodiversity. We must use them in a positive way to see how they can better help to preserve the limited resources that we need for food production, soil soil, water and air too. There are professions like doctors, for example, which are very popular in our country, but you need a doctor maybe once or twice a year if you are healthy. We need farmers every day because we eat 2 to 3 times a day. We need healthy foods precisely to avoid going to the doctor as well. So it's essential to reconnect the consumer with the producer and perhaps pay a better price for food, because many of our fellow citizens have somewhat lost a connection with the reality of production. It is also a cultural issue that must be put back to the center of our education, but also of public procurement. For example, by giving preference, for example, in public canteens to organic products or regional products so that people know what comes from the surrounding area. This is going to be very, very important. And the example of this young Dutch farmer who had no family history in agriculture is very significant when it comes to seeing how she tries to reconnect consumers with production. That's going to be key into getting more appreciation too.
You've also heard Martin Siemen's arguments in favour of innovative solutions to open up rural areas and encourage young people to stay there. What tools are available to you on this matter?
Obviously, we have several tools at the European level to support rural areas. We have cohesion policies on the one hand, which I find is used more in cities than in rural areas, a little too often for my liking. But we also have the second pillar of the Common Agricultural Policy, which also makes a significant contribution to innovation in rural areas to improve the working conditions of our farmers. On the other hand, we obviously also have people, services and infrastructure. People who live in cities take certain services for granted. This is not always the case in rural areas. I recently had a meeting with young European farmers. There was a Swedish farmer who was a dairy farmer, and she told me that where she lives in Sweden, it's a choice between cows or children, because there is no childcare in some rural areas. Or you have to drive for an hour, but if you have a farm like that, you can't. And so, indeed, we have to work on these services in rural areas. It's going to be very, very important to also allow for a certain standard of living that's compatible with family life. And I think we need to help these rural areas have economic activity.
Commissioner Hansen, thank you very much.
Merci à vous.
All these conversations reveal an urgent need to ensure generational renewal in European agriculture. This, of course, requires easy access to land and finance, but the future of young people in farming also depends on recognizing the hard work which goes into the products we eat, and that means paying a fair price for it. This concludes the 55th episode of Food for Europe. Thank you to all my guests, Justine Poppe, Anne Van Leeuwen, Martin Siemen, and Christophe Hansen, for their contributions to this podcast. In the next episode, we will talk about viticulture, a sector navigating its way through both climate change and the tariff crisis. See you next time, and until then, as always, take care of yourself.
The entire agri-food sector bears the brunt of the climate crisis.
Pour parler d'agriculture et d'Europe à la jeunesse.
Proteste der Landwirte zeigen, wie wichtig der stratégische Dialog ist.
La PAC, c'est plus du tiers du budget total de l'Union européenne.
We have to find a new consensus on the future of agriculture.